At Sierra, discover top workout gear at incredible prices, which might lead to another discovery. Your headphones haven't been connected this whole time. Awkward. Discover top brands at unexpectedly low prices. Sierra, let's get moving.
When did making plans get this complicated? It's time to streamline with WhatsApp, the secure messaging app that brings the whole group together. Use polls to settle dinner plans. Send event invites and pin messages so no one forgets Mom's 60th. And never miss a meme or milestone. All protected with end-to-end encryption. It's time for WhatsApp. Message privately with everyone. Learn more at whatsapp.com.
It is Monday, September 29th, 2025. Welcome back to Hang Up and Listen, the sports podcast here at Slate. Back with you this week. I'm Alex Kirshner. I'm a contributing writer for Slate, and I also co-host the college football podcast Split Zone Duo. This week, I think a lot of our listeners are not huge golf fans, but you might be interested in what happened at the Ryder Cup this weekend, where the American embarrassment went well beyond becoming the first team to lose this event on home soil since 2012. We'll preview the Major League Baseball playoffs, which start this week, and we'll also look back on some shocking collapses that kept teams out of those playoffs. And we'll discuss a potentially world-altering deal in sports video games. It's a very newsy episode, but there's more news to be talked about in Slate's podcasting universe. The shutdown clock is ticking again, and Trump is threatening mass layoffs across the federal government if Republicans don't get their way. But at least one Democrat says this is blackmail, and it's probably illegal. What Next host Mary Harris talks to Senator Chris Van Hollen about his party's next move, exclusively on What Next Plus. As usual, joining me this week is Lindsay Gibbs, the women's sports lead at CBS Sports and the publisher of Power Plays, a newsletter that covers the key stories of the moment in women's sports. Lindsay, how goes?
Good. I'm so excited the NFL took the weekend off. As a Panthers fan, it was, there's so many other sports happening that it was nice for football to just pause for a bit.
Sure. My football team, the Steelers, won on Sunday morning, but it was one of those games that was so repulsive to teams, to fans of both teams, probably, that I felt terrible about it afterward, even though they're 3-1 and leading the AFC North.
It also took place in Ireland, and your backup quarterback got jumped or something?
Yes, the Steelers' third-string quarterback got apparently jumped, mugged, etc. on the streets of Dublin before the game. Scary situation.
Sure.
Hate that for Skylar Thompson.
Yeah.
And, of course, we have Ben Lindbergh with us. Ben is a senior editor for The Ringer, and he co-hosts the Effectively Wild Baseball podcast. Ben, are you ready to give yourself to the randomness of the Major League Baseball postseason, or do you think you have a plan to tame it this year?
Oh, I am very ready, and we will discuss that on this episode. I do have one football question for you, because in addition to taking the entire weekend off, as Lindsay noted, some teams that did play decided that they didn't need to pick a winner, that a game could end in a tie, as the Cowboys-Packers game did at 40 all in the Micah Parsons return to Dallas. I guess no one really wins when the Cowboys play, just in general, but that has literally been true a couple times already this season. Why is football more willing to tie than baseball? And how can I bring that to baseball, my original favorite sport? Because I would love to have ties be a possibility rather than the zombie runner and a runner starting on second base in the 10th inning just to get things over with more quickly. Why do football fans tolerate this, or do they?
American hubris, I would say. Football is the sport that should be most given to a tie. Like, it's the most physically brutal of our major sports here in the United States. Not going to claim in the world. Rugby fans, don't jump down my throat. I understand there are more brutal games. But football games should end in ties, frankly. They don't, but they should. And
rarely.
In fact, they used to in college football, and obviously they still can occasionally in the NFL. College football has decided that ties are simply not okay. And so we have to do shambolic things like, by the time you get to a third overtime, move to the 2-point conversion shootout, which, okay, I mean, it's not real football, but if you want to make the game come down to a couple of 3-yard plays, then sure.
Yeah, that's zombie runner-esque. So some sports and some leagues still have a tolerance for the tie, and others say we have to pick a winner. We have to end these games with someone being the victor at all costs, even if it means sort of embarrassing the sport. Nate Silver, I believe, modeled the new overtime rules in the NFL and estimated that there would be ties about 0.5% of the time, which is like double the historical average. And some of my Effectively Wild Patreon supporters, I believe, determined that the equivalent in baseball, if you were tolerant of that many ties, would be just having the game be tied after 14 innings or so, which I would be fine with. They do that in Japan, in NPB. They are okay with ties. But here, it's always been, American exceptionalism. We don't like ties. There always has to be a victor or everyone goes home unhappy. And yet the most popular American sport does at least live with ties from time to time and just made them more common, if anything. So I don't know why the differential. I don't know if it's just like how often football teams play. They don't play that often, or whether it's about the punishing, grueling nature of football, not wanting to extend it too long, not having sold ad inventory for extra quarters or something. I don't know what it is, but I wish that it could be extended to baseball somehow.
The only thing is that it's a slippery slope from having 40 to 40 ties on Sunday Night Football to a drastically enhanced social safety net, for example. You have to be careful about what level of Europeanness you can allow in American sports. And I think people are worried about that. They're attuned to it. Before we get into our business, as always, we want to say thank you to our Slate Plus members who make this show possible. You get shows like the one we just talked about from What Next. Subscribing helps us make this thing, and it allows you to get it ad-free, but you also get bonus segments. And there's good news that we have one of those live for Slate Plus members right now. It's about the WNBA hitting a flashpoint in an ongoing controversy over how it protects its players and how it's officiated as the playoffs roll along. You can hear that episode right now as long as you are a Slate Plus member. Subscribe by going to Apple Podcasts and clicking Try Free at the top of our show page, or visit slate.com/hangupplus to get access wherever you listen. This year's Ryder Cup was the 45th to be contested between the best players in golf from the United States and Europe, and it was billed quite often and by people directly involved as perhaps the biggest Ryder Cup ever. The biggest attendance, the biggest literal build-out with towering grandstands erected all over Bethpage State Park on Long Island, the biggest stakes even, with the United States coming off an embarrassing loss 2 years ago in Rome, and the Europeans gunning for something that almost never happens, a road win in an event that typically just goes the way of the home side. There were more things adding to the spectacle. There was a year-long will he or won't he saga, which we've talked about, around American team captain Keegan Bradley, who ultimately chose not to be a playing captain. There was the inevitable Trumpification of the whole event. On Friday, the event's first day, the president, who has been lovingly embraced by pretty much the entire elite professional golf world, including the U.S. team, literally escorted his friend Bryson DeChambeau to the first tee. Multiple American team members did Trump's shimmying dance that he's known for. The White House had claimed beforehand that Trump saved the Ryder Cup by intervening in a labor dispute in the area to facilitate transportation. It was sports, and it was definitely politics. And the European team even sang a little, I think, playful "Are You Watching Donald Trump" song after the Europeans won this event. Through 2 of the 3 days, this was on track to be one of the worst blowout losses in Ryder Cup history. The Americans did fight back admirably on Sunday, but still lost. And afterward, a lot of the talk was about how obnoxious the people in attendance were. From people on the ground, we heard that some truly vile things were being said towards the European players and their families throughout the event. And it seemed like a really unusually toxic scene, even by the standards of New York sports or our current moment in America.
That bunker's looking tasty. Guys, shut the fuck up.
Oh, damn. And here to talk about it with us is Kevin Van Valkenburg, a tremendous sports journalist who is the director of content for Fried Egg Golf, a tremendous outlet that you should be aware of if you're not already. KVV was on site at the Ryder Cup this weekend and can tell us a little bit about what was going on. KVV, thank you so much for joining us. You've covered college football. You've covered, must be dozens or verging on hundreds of golf tournaments. I'm led to believe that what was heard actually on the grounds at Bethpage Black, I believe you said this yourself, was even worse than it's being described because you wouldn't repeat some of the things that you heard on this show. Is that right?
Yeah, that's accurate. I think it was about as toxic of an atmosphere, I think, as I can remember at a sporting event. Golf is just a little bit different in that silence is sort of part of the kind of build up to the actual athletic display. When you're a football game, a soccer game, there's sort of this kind of wall of sound that's always going. And so nothing stands out quite as much. But in golf, you have to be quiet in order for the players to do their thing. And so when people kind of take advantage of that and scream awful things, not only do the players hear it, but their spouses hear it. Their spouses at the Ryder Cup are walking along inside the ropes, and people are sort of leering over the rope line to scream things at them and say kind of as toxic of things about their marriages or about their physiques or about rumors about them. And so it just felt pretty dispiriting, I think, to be a golf fan and to see some of it unfold.
How much of this was a reaction to the U.S. playing so poorly and the fans kind of having maybe nowhere to channel their excitement and energy and kind of using it to, I mean, there's no excuse for anything like that, but I'm just wondering how much the poor start, do you think that played into it at all and into that environment?
I think it played into it a little bit in the sense of they didn't have a lot to cheer for. And so they were just sort of thinking that their job and their role was to kind of defend home turf by making it a difficult environment, trying to throw people off their games. It's sort of let's be honest, it's sort of kind of a Long Island mentality of like, hey, like if you're going to come here, it's going to be tough for you to play. You're going to have to put up with a lot of stuff. These are Jets fans. These are Mets fans. These are people who are sort of used to kind of turning on their own team and stuff and being frustrated by what the product on the field. And so I think like for years, the buildup has been, oh, there's never going to be a tougher Ryder Cup to play than Bethpage Black. And so I think that some of that reputationally was factored into it. But, it's also just being honest here, part of the current political climate. Like you don't have to apologize for being really kind of obnoxious, really kind of, your worst version of yourself. And that played into it, I think, throughout the weekend.
We can talk about the American kind of comeback on Sunday, but before we get there, maybe you could just explain what went wrong prior to that point. It's probably a long list, so that might take up the rest of the segment. But was it more tactics, strategy? Was it more just pure execution? Should Keegan Bradley have played after all?
I always kind of balk at this idea that Americans don't care as much about the Ryder Cup because I think the individual players, they really care. I mean, Scottie Scheffler, has only really teared up like 2 times in his career that I can remember, and both of them involving the Ryder Cup. It hurts to sort of be the best player in the world and be humiliated like this. I think structurally, the Americans don't care as much as the Europeans. The Europeans treat this as like a 2-year job, and the Americans appointing Keegan Bradley as a captain or asking him to be captain to sort of save them from their own, buffoonery in various Ryder Cups is sort of indicative of how they just don't have like a long-term plan for this. Keegan Bradley, just by the nature of being 38 years old and still being a professional golfer, couldn't treat this like a full-time job where it was all he did. Whereas Luke Donald and Eduardo Molinari and Jose Maria Olazabal, like this is what they do for 2 years in the lead up to this. And so Keegan Bradley made some tactical mistakes, but also part of what led to those tactical mistakes is like not having the experience to know like what decisions he could make. He said afterwards, I regret cutting down the rough. I should have gone with my instincts to that. And so he had stats people telling him like this will benefit, I think, the US better than it will benefit the Europeans. And he decided, well, I don't know if I should go with my gut or go with my stats because he just didn't have enough experience to kind of consider the other options. And so that made the Europeans you have the best player in the world in Scottie Scheffler, also the most accurate driver kind of on the American team. His strengths were sort of neutralized by what the setup was, which is there was no penalty for missing fairways or missing greens. And so when you take your best player and you kind of drag him back down to the rest of the field, it takes away a huge advantage for you. And so some of those mistakes totally were tactical. Though he got a lot criticized with a lot about the pairing stuff. But really, you have to kind of play the guys that are on your team. They're automatic qualifiers to your team. And so you had to figure out a way to play some of these guys. And I think, again, like the statistics that they had from their scouting department probably told him this is a good pairing. And so I think Keegan was trying to sort of play catch up and say, yeah, I'll do what you say because I don't have 2 to 4 years of experience with this, whereas the Europeans have built this thing up for a long time to sort of, turn it into a dominant force within the world of team golf.
A few weeks ago, we had the U.S. Open and Trump came, and there was a lot of security and chaos that surrounded that event. I wondered how much his arrival to the course on Friday, what were the vibes on the court? What was the security like? What impact, if any, do you think that had on the tournament?
The security was pretty intense, but I got to say that, to be honest, like the vibes were kind of lame. I think he thought that it was going to be this raucous like cheer of him entering the sort of Roman arena, and it was sort of a dud in some ways to the crowd reaction. He kept kind of waving like, let's go, and there was a flyover, and the national anthem was played, and I think some of the American players saw him there and did the Trump dance as they were walking down the tee, and it just kind of, I don't know that it affected play very much, but you certainly saw a lot of people there in their sort of, Trump gear, the things that make it kind of part of their identity. And, those people they certainly take cues from the president, feeling like you should not be kind to your enemies, that you don't have to sort of have any kind of tact when it comes to speaking about other people. And that, I think it would be totally disingenuous to pretend like that didn't contribute to some of the atmosphere out there and some of the things that are being said. It's just the way that part of our political climate is, that you don't have to be ashamed at all of how you behave. You should embrace your most, I think, obnoxious self in those situations. And that played out.
Last one for you, a two-parter. So we covered the distracting Donald on the U.S. side. The Donald on the European side seems to be the opposite of that. He's done such a good job as captain that they seem to want to make him captain for life. What is it exactly that he does behind the scenes? Is it a leadership thing? Is it a tactics thing? And then what do you make of the fact that the Europeans did kind of take their feet off the pedal on Sunday and the Americans were able to rally?
So much of these guys' lives is individual golf. Like everything is geared towards winning individual tournaments. And it's a very different kind of golf than like team golf, trusting, particularly foursomes, where you're playing alternate shot. One person's hitting a drive, one person's hitting the approach, the other person then goes and hits the putt. And that requires a lot of trust. It requires a lot of feeling comfortable with the people that you're playing with. It's almost like a different sport than the stroke play stuff. And so I think what Luke Donald has done over the course of several years, that he's now been captain for 4 years, essentially since his appointment, which is like getting the players to believe that, hey, we're putting you in the best position to succeed. We think this person who you might not be friends with, you might not know all that well, they're the best person whose game fits yours. So form a bond with him. Like John Rahm and Tyrrell Hatton, they really didn't know each other all that well and didn't play each other all that much before Ryder Cups, and now they're like some of the best of buds. And Rory McIlroy and Tommy Fleetwood, another example of like two great foursomes players. They just have figured out the way to make it work. And what Luke Donald has done is gathered, Eduardo Molinari is kind of like the man behind the man. He was a professional golfer, but not everyone of like great regard, played a little bit on Ryder Cups. He has a analytics sort of business where it's dedicated specifically to professional golf. And Team Europe has really entrusted him to kind of help gather that information. It's a little bit like, when the first kind of analytics people in baseball came around, you could think of him as like the Michael Lewis of golf, like first person who really understood, here's where we can gain a statistical advantage. It doesn't mean that we are going to win because of this, but these things will help make the margins where we are deficient smaller and the margins where we have strengths to be greater. And so Luke has gotten all the players to buy into that. It's not enough to just put stats in front of a person and say, these say you should tee off on the even holes. It's getting them to buy in and reasons why that would be good for them. And I think that what Luke Donald has done is basically communicate really well, have humility about it, treat it like this is an important part of history. It's a part of their legacy. He talked about all this last night, and Rory McIlroy was like tearing up. He was basically saying like, This is the best weeks of our lives. Luke Donald says this. We will remember this stuff forever. So as much as like the singles stuff, it's that's sort of a reflection on, well, Americans know how to do this. They know how to play good golf. They just don't really know how to buy in on all the other stuff. And I think lastly, like the part of the reason for the comeback is it's really hard to win a Ryder Cup on the road. It's only happened, two times in the last, now three times in the last 30 years for the Europeans, and the Americans haven't won in 32 years, and it'll be 34 years when we, about 36 years by the time we come back to America. And so like sometimes you just put everything into it and you almost kind of ran out of gas. Like the Europeans put so much into building that big lead that they were kind of gassed. Rory was gassed. John Rahm was gassed. They only won one of the 12 matches on the last day, but they had built up a big enough lead in the front. So the Americans, man, they've always been good at singles. Every kind of time they've won the singles session way more times than they've lost it. And so there was, a comeback is always like a chance on the final day. But until the Americans figure out how to play the other part of which is essential to the Ryder Cup, which is team golf, it's going to continue to sort of be like this.
Kevin Van Valkenburg, he's the director of content for Fried Egg Golf, which if you are a Hang Up listener and you like golf, you should be reading it and listening to its podcast offerings. KVV, thanks for making time for us on your travel day. Much appreciated.
You bet.
KVV truly is one of the best in the business. The Trump piece of this Ryder Cup is interesting. I completely agree with him that anybody who is trying to decouple the political mood in the country from the behavior that we saw at Bethpage is intentionally missing it. It's not to say that it's the only reason this happened, and I certainly didn't go through the crowd, nor did anybody with a polling operation to find out the politics of the people involved. New York sports fans are going to be New York sports fans. But you know who seemed to think that the Ryder Cup was a very political operation that was tied to conservative politics, partisan politics, was the White House press office, the president himself, several of the players and the captain of the American team, and a good number of the people who were in attendance at this Ryder Cup. Yeah, I feel like this really was the ultimate sporting manifestation of where we are right now, which KVV explained eloquently. And it did not used to be exactly this way.
And the thing that I didn't anticipate, we knew that Donald Trump was and would again be a sports-centric president, and that he would constantly insert himself in sports stories and events in some way. But during his first term, there was often an oppositional relationship there or some resistance of some sort. And we've covered this, the difference in teams going to the White House after winning championships versus not showing up, for instance. That's not happening so much this time around, just the opposite, in fact. And it's just the level of pandering and obsequiousness that we've seen the athletes exhibit. And we talked about this during the Four Nations face-off as well. It's not just the fans, it's the actual players, which is just kind of embarrassing on a national level, really. And obviously, my opposition to Donald Trump notwithstanding, I'd like to think that even if I approved of the president, making him so central to this, in essence, doing a win one for the Donald kind of thing here whenever we have some sort of international competition, it's quite tiresome and also just a sideshow, as everything involving Donald Trump is. I'm under no illusions about the political loyalties of the athletes in various sports that we discuss here. I guess I'd just like them to be a little less front and center. Never saw myself as a stick to sports guy, but it makes it hard to root for our own teams in a way that, even if you're a patriotic person, as I have been, hopefully will be again, it's tough to pull for these guys when there's this sort of spectacle, when they're kind of willingly embracing this whole show.
Yeah, there was a moment where on Friday morning after, of course, the 3-1 loss in the opening session,
U.S. was already down.
It was already down, but Keegan Bradley was doing the interview with USA Network or whoever was the broadcaster, I believe. And he goes, well, I just saw the flyover, so Trump's on his way. And I think that's going to turn things around. He was really, and so I had myself kind of enjoying that it didn't turn around in that way that afternoon. And that's a weird place to be because I'm not rooting for Team Europe, really?
Well, look, Trump wanted this to be a political showcase for himself. I mean, as KVV was describing, I don't think any of us should be shocked that the American Ryder Cup team is pretty much chock full of MAGA types who were thrilled to see him and did the shimmying Trump dance whatsoever. I do think that what shouldn't be lost here is the PGA of America's embrace of this spectacle and of Trump in general. The PGA of America is different than the PGA Tour. The PGA of America is the nearly 30,000 member organization that is comprised of the basically teachers of golf in the United States, the professionals who work at every golf course that you would find, who give lessons, who try to teach life lessons, they would say, through educating people about golf and helping people get better at golf. And there is nothing, in my opinion, that is more antithetical to the PGA of America's mission than cheating in golf, puffing up scores, being dishonest in the game, and to have just a documented golf cheat who still has to insist to the world and to his fellow club members that he wins club championships with a swing where that is just simply impossible, and there is no way that that has ever happened legitimately, is just such an abdication of what the PGA of America says that it is. And I understand that, you know, even if there were not such a political embrace of Trump's project by the PGA of America, that you're not going to be overtly oppositional probably to the sitting president who can and probably would try to damage your operations if you were too mean to him. But the embrace is just totally out of step with what this organization claims to be. And I think it makes a lot of the PGA of America's stated ideals extremely hollow.
Can't wait for the World Cup.
It's coming. It promises to be a party. Also an upcoming party, the Major League Baseball postseason. And we'll talk about it right after this.
This podcast is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. You chose to hit play on this podcast today? Smart choice. Progressive loves to help people make smart choices. And that's why they offer a tool called Auto Quote Explorer that allows you to compare your Progressive car insurance quote with rates from other companies. So you can save time on the research and can enjoy savings when you choose the best rate for you. Give it a try after this episode at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Not available in all states and situations. Prices vary based on how you buy.
Eczema isn't always obvious, but it's real. And so is the relief from Ebglyss. After an initial dosing phase, about 4 in 10 people taking Ebglyss achieved itch relief and clear or almost clear skin at 16 weeks. And most of those people maintain skin that's still more clear at 1 year with monthly dosing.
Ebglyss, lebrikizumab LBKZ, a 250 milligram per 2 milliliter injection, is a prescription medicine used to treat adults and children 12 years of age and older who weigh at least 88 pounds or 40 kilograms with moderate to severe eczema, also called atopic dermatitis, that is not well controlled with prescription therapies used on the skin or topicals, or who cannot use topical therapies. Ebglyss can be used with or without topical corticosteroids. Don't use if you're allergic to Ebglyss. Allergic reactions can occur that can be severe. Eye problems can occur. Tell your doctor if you have new or worsening eye problems. You should not receive a live vaccine when treated with Ebglyss. Before starting Ebglyss, tell your doctor if you have a parasitic infection.
Searching for real relief? Ask your doctor about Ebglyss and visit ebglyss.lilly.com or call 1-800-LILY-RX or 1-800-545-5979.
The last few weeks of the Major League Baseball season were all about collapses, as Ben explained for us in an Afterball last week. The New York Mets, in free fall after assembling one of the most expensive teams ever, highlighted by the biggest contract in sports history for Juan Soto, who wasn't even the problem. The Detroit Tigers, coughing up a 14-game lead in the American League Central. Even the Houston Astros, the most consistent winners in the sport this side of Dodger Stadium for a decade, going into the tank down the stretch to jeopardize their own 8-year streak of October appearances. The dust settled. Sunday was the last day of the regular season. The Astros did indeed miss out in the AL, and the free-falling Tigers claimed the last wildcard spot on a tiebreaker against those Astros, maybe the most overt case of backing into something that any team has ever done in sports history. And in the National League, the Mets did indeed lose out to the Cincinnati Reds, who claimed the last spot with all of 83 wins, a sickeningly low amount if you're a fan of a team that just didn't try this year, as I am. Ben, Before we get going here on the playoffs, which are going to be very interesting, which of these collapses was the most jarring to you personally? And you are allowed to say the Tigers, even though they did get into the postseason as well.
Yeah, I think the Tigers is the most surprising, even though it's ultimately not the most, I guess, shameful, or it might not stick to them. Now, one of the entertaining things is that they have to turn right around and play the Guardians again. So there's really an opportunity for them to put this behind them. If they're able to beat the Guardians and advance to the ALDS, then it's almost as if this never happened, and it can just be some terrible nightmare for Tigers fans. Whereas the Mets don't have that possible excuse. So I think the Mets is worse. The Tigers is more surprising to me just because it was such an enormous lead, 15 and a half games in the division at its peak, and no team has ever overcome a deficit that large. And it's not like the Guardians are a great team. I mean, they made an incredible comeback, and it was just a wild finish and one of the best stories of the season. But you look at that lineup and you look at all the guys who pulled through for them in September and how good their rotation was, and it was not an intimidating team, let's say, on paper, at least. So, yeah, got to go Tigers, but the Mets, that hurts the worst, not just because they're actually out of the playoffs. The Astros, look, that's bad too, but the expectations, they lost a lot of guys to injuries. They haven't missed the playoffs since 2016, so they were due. It was time, right? And a lot of things went wrong for them this year. The Mets, though, because it's the Mets, you just pile that on top of all of the previous late season Mets collapses, which often ended with weekend series against the Marlins. It's just shades of 2007, 2008. It's the biggest spending team in baseball. You put all those things together, then I think there's more of a Lowell Mets is back after it seemed like that was banished with the Wilpon years.
So much of the story of baseball last season with the Dodgers winning and then continuing to spend in the offseason was about buying these, the big spenders, and baseball's rich getting richer. And it feels a little bit like this season was an antidote to that. Obviously, the Dodgers could still repeat. They're very much in this, but with the Mets embarrassing themselves and after their big offseason spending, and then a team like the Brewers seeming like actually the real deal here. I know we did a segment on them about a month or so ago when it was kind of like, is this thing happening? It seems like it's really happening. So do you feel like the baseball has kind of found a little bit of balance here?
I think it's always had more than a bit of balance. I think that idea has been a bit overblown that you can just buy championships, certainly because the playoffs are just so random that it's kind of a built-in backstop to ensure that you can't buy your way to a title. But you can, historically at least, buy your way to a much better chance of making the playoffs. And, the Dodgers, they barely won the division in the end. They were supposed to be the super team. They snapped up all these players on top of the already great players that they already had. And yet they barely managed to win the NL West. Now, if they go on a run and they win a World Series again, then the fact that they had kind of a mediocre season by their standards won't stop people from sounding the alarm again. And in fairness to the hand-wringers and the fretters, the fact that they still won the NL West again for the 12th time in 13 years, despite suffering a ton of injuries. I mean, that's just something they can do because they have this buffer of the biggest payroll in baseball. They can afford to lose all these guys. Probably would have sunk some other team's season, but the Dodgers just kind of keep on trucking, and the regular season is just a warm-up act for them. And as long as they get their guys healthy for October, which they mostly have done, then they're in pretty good shape. But yeah, I mean, the Mets, cautionary tale, second biggest payroll in baseball, did not stop them from completely collapsing. So payroll is far from destiny in MLB.
Ben, it is one of my favorite times in the year, which is our time to help our co-host Lindsay Gibbs find a horse to back in these Major League playoffs. Last year, it was the San Diego Padres.
Yeah,
had a nice little run.
They're back again.
Ended when they couldn't score any runs over multiple games at the conclusion.
Minor details, It turns out that's important.
You do need to score runs. But I am curious, Ben, likability wise, and I know that you do not entirely see the sport through the lens of rooting for one team. In fact, I don't think you really do at all as your kind of MO with approaching baseball. But give me the most hateable, the most likable team. I mean, and I assume the most likable, let's be honest, it's got to be the Seattle Mariners.
Yeah. The nice thing about this playoff field, or one of them, is that the teams with the 4 longest droughts in MLB are all active. And the Mariners, of course, have never won a World Series. Neither have the Padres. Neither have the Brewers. And then you've got the Guardians, who, in addition to sneaking in improbable fashion, have not won a World Series since 1948, which is decades before the Mariners, Padres, or Brewers existed. So if you're going by just who kind of karmically deserves it the most, you've got 4 excellent chances there. Plus, you have a shot at having a World Series matchup between pennant winners who either have never won a World Series or haven't won one since the 40s, guaranteeing that some extended drought will end. There hasn't been a World Series between 2 franchises that had not previously won a championship since 1980. So I do think that the Mariners are quite easy to bandwagon, though, just because, not only have they never won a World Series, they've never been in a World Series. They've never won a pennant. They had not won the AL West since 2001. And they have the big dumper. They have Cal Raleigh. So you put all of those things together, and yeah, I'd probably bandwagon the Mariners, but there are a bunch of good options.
It's persuasive. And I do have to apologize to our hang up and listen fam that, I did say that I was going to follow the Padres all year, and I did not. Turns out having a job covering the WNBA also during the summer makes it hard to really dial in, but also it's a West Coast team. My team cannot be a West Coast team, Ben. I can't do it. I am not tough enough. I'm not tough enough.
Well, can you go for the ultimate underdogs then? The Guardians, the lovable losers for a while who then suddenly couldn't lose and somehow made the playoffs and won the division and can't hit, but make it work anyway. Haven't won in forever. Jose Ramirez is lovable. What could go wrong rooting for the Guardians?
That I think I can do. That's a pitch I like.
Okay. Eastern time zone. Perfect.
Some storylines that I could see evolving over the course of the next few weeks, depending on how things go. Public service advisory for our hang-up listeners. Should the Chicago Cubs beat the Padres in the wildcard series and make a run, I think you're going to get a lot of the Cubs are doing it for Charlie Kirk going around at least half of the internet. So you should be mindful that you should be mindful that will go on if the Cubs should make a run, if that impacts your rooting interests in any way. Positive or negative, who knows? The Cincinnati Reds being in this playoff series against the Dodgers, Ben, kind of sickens me because, objectively, this should have been the Pirates, who just didn't try this year. So pretty sickening that they're there. But we haven't mentioned the series that will obviously get the most attention, which is Yankees-Red Sox.
Yep. Yeah, I love that we're going straight from that big finish, which it almost seems like we're playing with house money here just because the end of the regular season was so unexpectedly exciting that it seemed like October started early. But we go right from that to the 2 intra-division matchups here of Guardians and Tigers. And then, yes, Yankees-Red Sox, which honestly has been kind of coasting for a while. Obviously, there's so much residual sports resentment there that's always going to be one of the best rivalries in sports. But these 2 teams haven't really rivaled each other all that much closely in recent years or played each other all that often in the playoffs. So there's some juice to this matchup. So that's a good one. Honestly, I think maybe the best thing about these playoffs is that there's even less separation among the teams than there typically is. So we talk all the time about baseball. It's a crapshoot. It's randomness. Anything can happen. And that's always true. But this year in particular, just because it was such a mid sort of season from a standings perspective, there just really weren't any super teams. No one who stood out. Yeah, the Brewers had an incredible run and other teams had times when they looked like they were dominant. But on the whole, no one won 100 games. There's no team here that doesn't have some obvious flaw. And not only does that make it even more random and kind of up for grabs than it usually is, but I hope and maybe this is hoping for too much, but I hope that there will be a little less sort of concern trolling or genuine concern about the playoff format or about, is baseball broken because in these short series, better teams can lose to worse teams easily. This year, there just aren't really teams that are that much better than any other team. So obviously, you're still going to be upset if your team loses. But it's hard to just say it's a great injustice because some team that won 105 games is going to lose to some team that won 85 games. There just isn't really enough separation here to say that anyone particularly deserves it. So it's just going to kind of come down to who has a hot month, as it often does.
It feels like the postseason will only be the second most contentious battleground in baseball going on right now, behind the one between Yankees fans and Mariners fans over Aaron Judge and Cal Raleigh. Ballots are due like now-ish, right?
They have to be submitted before the postseason. So whatever happens with those guys after now will not affect the results. If Aaron Judge chokes again, or if he's finally able to change the postseason narrative about himself. I mean, look, they're
You have a measured take on this. I know that you do.
I do.
Because you and your co-host Meg Rowley have talked about it fairly. But I just think that the Yankees fans need to be courteous about this and just step aside.
Yeah, I'm sure they will once they hear that. No, I generally, this is not persuasive to anyone, but I just care less about awards votes in general these days, especially something where it's not even like the entire BBWAA is passing judgment on these guys. It's 30 voters. It's a small subset of the electorate. And so what 30 people's opinions are about this race just doesn't sway me that much. It doesn't change what their actual value was that we saw in the field or what conclusions we individually reach. And, while sports debates are fun, that's part of what we do here on this podcast. I do think that sometimes it goes beyond debate and it becomes less about lifting one guy up than it does about tearing the other guy down. And the fact is that both of these players just had fantastic seasons. So my take is basically that whether Cal wins MVP or not, I think he's just the player of the year. Like, he had the more memorable, sensational, novel, historic season in some respects. And this is what I'm going to remember. Like, this season was more defined by Cal Raleigh than it was by Aaron Judge, if only because Judge was a victim of his success. And this was like his third best season, even though it was just a phenomenal season, because that's how good he has been. He hasn't really done anything new this year, aside from, I suppose, winning a batting title. Whereas Cal hitting 60 dingers as a catcher, that's incredible. Does that make it more valuable than Judge on paper by the stats? No. And I'm not even saying that this should count and decide who wins, just like Cal had a cooler season. But ultimately, that just matters more to me than what the 30 voters decide. But if they were to match up in this postseason, then that would be pretty exciting, much like when Judge faced Ohtani in the World Series last year. And speaking of Ohtani, he's also in the playoffs with the Dodgers, and he will be making his first postseason appearance as a starting pitcher in MLB. So that's something to pay close attention to. And adding to that intrigue, the Dodgers, who basically had no rotation left when they entered October last year, they just pieced things together with a few moderately healthy and effective guys and then just bullpenned it all the way. This season, it's kind of the opposite, where if anything, they have too many healthy and effective starters and just no back of the bullpen. And so they keep having excellent outings from their starters and then blowing those leads. And now they may have to put some of those starters into the bullpen and see how that works. So no shortage of storylines. We talked about one of the Ohio teams, the Reds, even though that reminds you of Bob Nutting and the Pirates' failure. They're also an excellent story. They and the Blue Jays really have been kind of like these star-crossed teams, and they just haven't made it, and they've had high expectations, and they have just fun, exciting stars, Vladimir Guerrero Jr. for the Blue Jays and others, and Ellie De La Cruz for the Reds. So I'm excited that those teams are finally in this thing too. Really, unless you're a Dodgers and or Yankees hater, which probably describes most people, like most of these teams pretty easy to root for in some respect, or have players who are fun to follow, or just haven't won in a long time. So I'm pretty pumped for this postseason.
Yeah, for me, no NL Central, and anything else would be fine as long as it's not one of those teams. I'm looking forward to it. Games start on Tuesday. Great day of them. Great day for that YouTube TV multi-view or whatever your equivalent is. Up next, leveraged buyouts. They're in the game.
Lowe's knows how to help make your home holiday ready for less. Get Select Style Selections vinyl flooring for just $1.99 per square foot and have it installed before the festivities begin. Our team can help you every step of the way. See a Lowe's Red Vest associate or visit Lowe's.com/holiday install to get started. Lowe's, we help, you save. Basic install only. Date restrictions apply. Subject to availability. Installed by independent contractors. See associate for details. Contiguous U.S. only.
Tonight, turn down the noise of the day and focus on the rest with AGZ, the nightly drink for winding down and resting up. New from AG1. AGZ supports your body's natural sleep cycle with clinically studied key herbs, adaptogens, and minerals in amounts supported by research. And no melatonin, helping you wake feeling rested. Wind down, rest up with AGZ. Learn more at drinkagz.com.
It's the Smucker's Uncrustables podcast with your host, Uncrustables. Okay, today's guest is rough around the edges. Please welcome Crust.
Thanks for having me.
Today's topic, he's round with soft, pillowy bread.
Hey.
Filled with delicious PB&J.
Are you talking about yourself?
And you can take him anywhere.
Why'd you invite?
And we are out of time.
Are you really cutting me off?
Uncrustables are the best part of the sandwich. Sorry, Crust.
The Wall Street Journal reported on Friday that Electronic Arts, the video game giant most known for EA Sports, was talking about a massive leveraged buyout that would take the company private, it's currently public, and put it in the hands of a group that would include the Saudi Arabian Public Investment Fund, nice guys, typical private equity giant Silver Lake, and the investment firm run by Trump's son-in-law Jared Kushner, whose collaborations with the Saudis have been well documented and were somehow not the subject of a national corruption scandal because we now live in a post-shame, post-corruption society. And in fact, just before we got on the mics today, this deal went official. It is happening for $55 billion, $20 billion of those dollars financed with debt, which is going to mean very interesting and probably bad cost-cutting, customer gouging, etc. ahead for EA Sports. But I've seen two early lines of response to this deal. One is from gamers, anxiety that EA, which is already known for bilking players as much as it can with this deluge of microtransactions after you actually buy the game, might move even more in that direction once it's under the control of people who need to make up billions of dollars in debt that they have put into this deal. And the second concern is from people who are worried about the politics, because this is the Saudi PIF, very, very cozy with Trump and his family, and also a cozy, an extension of an authoritarian government in the Middle East. And EA is going to be under the control now of a very friendly government to the American administration, Trump's own family member, and some more typical finance guys. Ben, to what extent would you worry about either of those concerns, the customer one or the dissolution of independent media one?
Yeah, I guess there are a lot of players of Electronic Arts games who would say that it's nothing new for EA to basically be operating as some sort of axis of evil, given everything you mentioned about, kind of predatory pricing and extracting as much money as you can from consumers, and just a general complacency or lack of upgrades when it comes to its annual series, such as Madden. There's already a ton of frustration about how those games have been run, and we've talked a bit about that in the past on this podcast. And to be clear, EA is bigger than sports games alone. It has Battlefield and The Sims and Apex Legends, etc. But this is a sports podcast, so we can focus on that. I guess I'd say that this is not entirely new in terms of the Saudi sovereign wealth fund spreading its cash around the video game industry, or even EA specifically, because the PIF already owns about 10% of EA stock. So now it's just expanding that relationship. And it's, this sort of sports washing endeavor that we have talked about in connection to Live Golf and other initiatives across the sporting industry. The same thing is happening in other spheres of entertainment too, right? I mean, it's happening in comedy right now. That's been a big story with a comedy show in Riyadh coming up next month. The Saudis hosted the Esports World Cup back in this summer. And, that took place in Riyadh as well. And there were people protesting that and sounding the alarm. And there have been all sorts of investments in other gaming companies. And, sometimes it's purely just an investment play. Sometimes, though, there has been at least the appearance of an influence on the content. For instance, this past summer, it was announced that Ubisoft's Assassin's Creed would be releasing an update to its latest, or one of its latest Assassin's Creed titles that would take place in ancient Saudi Arabia, and it seems to be funded, at least in part, by Saudi Arabia. And it's kind of a shady connection that they haven't fully acknowledged and detailed. But that's maybe more of an obvious kind of, okay, we're paying for play here. We're paying to influence the titles. I don't know what impact, if any, it will have on the sports games, whether sports gamers who buy these games every year will actually be able to tell a difference or not. The Saudis always insist that this is not about sports washing. This is about diversifying their portfolio and being less reliant on oil and just investing in other areas. But those areas do often come in these very public-facing spheres. And, lastly, I guess I'd just add that there's been a big wave of consolidation across the video game industry in recent years. So we've seen other big deals, Activision, Blizzard, and Microsoft, et cetera. There have been a lot of layoffs. It's because there seems to be some sort of stagnation, I guess, in the gaming market, especially when it comes to, say, AAA titles that are increasingly expensive and take longer and longer to produce. And there's just a little less kind of VC cash than there has been in the past. And so there has been a bit of a, wave of acquisitions, and the Saudis have been involved in prior waves as well with the Embracer Group when that kind of crashed and burned and has already been broken up. So in some ways it's not surprising, and it's still unclear to me, I guess, what the actual impact of sports washing is. And I don't know how you two feel about how effective it is, because whenever one of these investments happens, there's just a huge wave of publicity about the human rights abuses of Saudi Arabia. And so in some respects, it seems to backfire and bring the wrong kind of attention, unless they think any publicity is good publicity. But the very concept of sports washing seems to argue that some types of publicity are better than others.
I guess I understand the sports and the comedy and, the live event things for sports washing. I have a harder time really getting it in the video game investment market, like how that really applies as much. It's just probably limited thinking on my part. But I also...
No, I think you're right. I think you make a very good point there.
Like so what are they doing? And then I wonder, and I will admit I was reading an Associated Press article that brought this up, but is there some national security stuff here? Like, how much data are they collecting through this? And, all of that stuff. Is that something, like, am I going too conspiratorial to be like, that's worrisome?
I think it's a fair thing to wonder about that I will acknowledge is above my pay grade. But what I do think is interesting is the point that you make about, how would you even really effectuate an influence campaign through owning this massive video game operator? And I wouldn't put it past them to find some way to do that. But I also don't think that EA is going to put out a game next year that is like, oh, you can bomb Yemen and be the hero. Like NBA, I don't think that's what they're going to do. I don't think they would be that heavy-handed, or that would work. So, it's a little bit easier to see, right, in sports or in comedy, sort of what some of the angle is, even if, as Ben says, it backfires. You bring golf tournaments to Saudi Arabia, or you make the Saudi Arabian government be portrayed as in as friendly a fashion as possible by associating them with what you hope is a popular golf tour, even though nobody really watches it. Or you have this comedy festival upcoming that some people are taking massive checks to go and tell jokes at in the hopes that they won't be treated like dissidents or anyone who would risk that kind of behavior actually inside the kingdom. I don't really see it with video games either, but I also don't think that Jared Kushner or the PIF are the types of people to pass up that kind of opportunity if they think that one exists somewhere.
Mm-hmm. And you're right about the combination of debt plus private equity doesn't seem like it could be a great thing for consumers. And not that EA has been super consumer friendly as it is, but there's already so much frustration about, I guess you could call it the enshittification of some of these sports game franchises, especially the annual ones. And, there are exceptions like something like college football, which went away for years and years and years, and then came back in new rebuilt form and was a massive success in the US and critically well received as well. That's sort of the exception to the constant churn of we need a new sports game every year. So there's really only so much that we can actually improve it. Plus, there's less competition in the sports game arena than there used to be. There's just more monopolization of individual sports by individual franchises as opposed to competition that kind of kept companies on their toes and maybe led to some more competitive pricing. So they can kind of do what they want as it is. And will they then crack down even more to try to get out from under this debt load? Of course, maybe they do layoffs and redundancies and everything else. But is there a temptation to just lard these things up with more and more ways to get money out of people after they purchase your game, to make more and more live service ongoing games that attempt to extract funds from people not once, but on a monthly basis, on a regular basis? Yeah, I would think so. Is that Saudis, or is that just private equity, or is that just what all these big corporations are doing? Hard to say. So I don't know exactly how the Saudi influence will manifest here.
It's tricky because these groups might have different incentives. There's the Kushner group, which obviously they all want to make a lot of money, but the Kushner group has one type of political affiliation. The Saudi government has a different political, perhaps, motivation. And then there's Silver Lake, which is this massive private equity group. If it was just Silver Lake, there is a way that we know these things go. The goal is to buy the company, load it up with debt, in some ways increase cash flows, trim costs, whatever, and then sell it for more than you bought it. And it will be interesting to see if that process is painful in a way that gamers actually notice, because as you say, they're already not thrilled with the way that it's going with EA games.
Yeah. Now, if the Sovereign Wealth Fund came out and said, we are removing microtransactions because of our beneficence, and now that might work. Yeah. That might be some solid sports
It was
washing.
our leader, Mohammed bin Salman, who did not want you to be subject to these fees for Madden Ultimate Team. Honestly, it would be a genius play.
Yes. I could absolutely see some people, writing off some human rights abuses or a journalist disappearing from time to time if it meant that they no longer had to deal with that.
Indeed. Much to watch over the next handful of years. Once upon a time, there was a massive tobacco company based in Lindsay's neck of the woods in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, known as R.J. Reynolds. There was also once a massive food brand called Standard Brands, made a bunch of stuff that you might have had in your pantry back in the earlier part of the 20th century. And in fact, there was an even larger food brand called Nabisco. Well, Nabisco merged with Standard Brands in 1981, and not that much time after that, Nabisco did its own big merger. The cigarette business, you see, had gotten a little bit tougher as the 20th century wore on, and so Nabisco came together with R.J. Reynolds, a marriage of food and tobacco, to form RJR Nabisco. And in 1988, a private equity firm, Kohlberg Kravis Roberts, put together a $25 billion leveraged buyout to take that company private, much in the same way that EA Sports or Electronic Arts is now going private. pending regulatory approval. Saw the private jets KKR did, saw the corporate largesse involved here, and thought that this would be an opportunity for private equity to cut costs, find cash flows, and make a lot of money. The deal didn't really work out that well. RJR, the tobacco company, is back on its own again now, and Nabisco is now part of Mondelez, the food giant. But the deal was very famous, and there was a great book written about it called The Barbarians at the Gate. It's a business book that covered how this deal came together, and I think it stands as one of the great business books of all time if you really want to understand the unique bleakness of private equity, but why it sometimes makes a lot of sense for at least the people in charge. So Ben, I ask you, on the occasion of this Electronic Arts deal, what is your Barbarian at the Gate?
Good question. By the way, Barbarians at the Gate, co-authored by the great John Hellier, author of one of the best baseball and sports books of all time, Lords of the Realm, which I talked to Hellier about for a retrospective Ringer piece back in 2019. That book about the lead up to the 1994 strike is essential reading as we potentially careen toward another MLB work stoppage. Well, Robert Redford died earlier this month at age 89, and although there's been no shortage of tributes to the actor, director, producer, and activist, Hang Up and Listen might not seem like an obvious place to pay homage. He's not as prolific a sports movie star as, say, Kevin Costner, Woody Harrelson, Wesley Snipes, or Adam Sandler, or even Redford's friend and screen partner, Paul Newman. When you think of Robert Redford sports movies, you think of The Legend of Bagger Vance. Okay, you probably don't, though he did direct that. No, when you think of Redford sports movies, you naturally think of The Natural. When you think of Redford movies released in 1969, you think of Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. When you think of Redford movies directed by Michael Ritchie, you think of The Candidate. And when you think of Redford movies co-starring Gene Hackman, if you think of anything, you think of A Bridge Too Far. Well, I have not come to knock The Natural, Butch Cassidy, The Candidate, or even A Bridge Too Far, though the last one of those isn't great. I've come to tell you that when we consider Robert Redford movies about sports, released in 1969, directed by Michael Ritchie, or featuring Gene Hackman, we should remember Downhill Racer. Now, I never remembered Downhill Racer while Redford was alive. Like most folks, I'd missed the movie. But one silver lining of great artists dying, which I am generally against, to be clear, is that when we lose them, we often develop a new or renewed appreciation for their work. Maybe that doesn't do much for the departed person who's still dead, but it's some consolation to the living. In the days after Redford's death, my mom, whom I wouldn't describe as a cinephile or a big sports fan, asked me if I'd seen Downhill Racer. I hadn't, and was surprised to discover that it has the highest Metacritic rating of any Redford film. So I watched it, and I'm glad I did. Thanks, Mom, and thanks, Robert Redford. Downhill Racer, written by James Salter and directed by Ritchie in his feature film debut, came out about a month after Butch Cassidy. It stars Redford as hot dog downhill skier David Chaplet, the new addition to an American underdog downhill team that's competing with the European powers for respect, acclaim, and ultimately medals at the Olympics. When Chaplet replaces an injured racer on the roster, Hackman's coach, Claire, tells him, "Don't expect to be given the world." Chaplet answers, "I don't expect to be given anything." He isn't a team player, but as another racer tells Chaplet's direct rival, well, it's not exactly a team sport. Chaplet is interested only in winning. He drives fast, moves fast with women, and most of all, skis fast. He doesn't like stiff skis that provide greater stability because they might slow him down. He's a danger to himself and also to his teammates, which causes Hackman's coach to ream him out in the longest scene the two actors share.
What's there to understand? I'm here because I ski and I ski fast. That's all there is to it.
That's it, huh? Yeah, you ski fast. You race. But you're reckless. You rack up a lot. No consistency. That's what Creech has.
It doesn't win a medal.
It counts for a lot. It comes from a certain consideration for the sport. A desire to learn. That's something you never had. You never had any real education, did you? All you ever had was your skis. And that's not enough.
That is enough for Chaplet to win gold. But the movie leaves us with the question of whether winning is enough. When Chaplet arrives at the Olympics, a reporter asks him how he feels. "This is it," he says. Then he's asked about his plans for after the Olympics. "This is it," he repeats, as if to emphasize how focused he is on the task at hand. The subtext is that he has no idea how to feel or when to go when he isn't on skis or distracted by the lonely, unglamorous mundanity of training. After he wins, he's asked again, "What are your plans?" I don't know, he answers. That's the last line of the movie before he's hoisted onto some spectators' shoulders and carried away. Well, of course he wins the race and gets the girl, Roger Ebert began in a dismissive review of Newman's 1969 cliched car racing movie Winning, about a driver who wins the Indy 500. Redford's racer wins too, so on the surface his movie might seem like more of the same sports tropes. But not only does Redford's racer not get the girl, he doesn't get the point. He routinely tunes out the women he sleeps with when they start talking about their careers or families. To him, they're conquests, not potential partners, and thus they see him the same way. And he has little in common with his taciturn farmer father, played by Walter Stroud, with whom he has a few stilted exchanges during an off-season visit to his dad's humble house in Idaho Springs, the closest thing the itinerant racer has to a home. As they talk, a clock ticks loudly.
I had a pretty good year. Win any money? Money? No, see, we're thinking ahead 2 years for the Olympics. The Olympics? The Olympics ain't for money. No, but for afterwards. Oh? So that's how it works, huh? Yeah, it can, because, you put together 2 good years, you win a couple of salaries. Well, I just hope you don't end up asking yourself the question some folks ask me. What's he do it for? Well, I'll be famous. I'll be a champion. The world's full of them.
The script is understated. "Chaplet, you can win," is the only pep talk his coach gives him before the big race. The movie was shot on location in a guerrilla cinema verite style at various European ski courses, and its handheld point-of-view footage from the slopes is still thrilling. Redford, who played a pivotal part in getting the movie made and bought a ski resort the year Downhill Racer came out, did some of his own skiing in the movie, just as Newman would do his own skating in Slapshot. Redford was 33 when the movie came out, older than the veteran racer his brash young rookie character is trying to supplant. So The Natural is not the only sports movie in which Redford is a little old for the part. Of course, he's impossibly handsome, and I want to own all the winter wear he models in the movie, but he also brings a brooding depth to the character that we get glimpses of in Chaplet's silent, searching looks in the mirror, or the way he locks eyes with a skier who seems poised to snatch away his win until he takes a late tumble. There but for the grace of God go I, Chaplet seems to think, and we wonder whether he'll learn anything from the close call, or whether his victory will turn tragic by cementing his single-minded pursuit. In contrast to his take on Winning, Ebert called Downhill Racer the best movie ever made about sports, without really being about sports at all. In 1975, Redford called it a very personal film for me and said it had a lot of implied thoughts that didn't have anything to do with skiing. I don't know what it says about the cultural cliche of sports that every good sports book or movie must be praised for not actually being about sports, but it's true that we watch sports and sports movies for much more than the final score. If you don't believe Ebert or find my zeal of the convert convincing, maybe you'll listen to Wall Street Journal sports columnist and former Hang Up guest Jason Gay, who recommended the movie this month in a piece with the provocative headline, "Robert Redford made a sports movie masterpiece, but it's not The Natural." Downhill Racer isn't Michael Ritchie's most famous sports movie either. That would be Bad News Bears. And it's certainly not the most famous sports movie in which Gene Hackman plays a coach. That would be Hoosiers. So perhaps it's doomed to be overshadowed by its directors and stars' subsequent contributions to the sports movie pantheon, and also consigned to obscurity by its skiing subject matter and its not-so-storybook finish. The Natural has the Hollywood ending to end all Hollywood endings, which completely and controversially inverts the conclusion of the book it's based on. In the novel The Natural, Roy Hobbs strikes out and ends up alone and disgraced. In the movie version, Hobbs hits the homer and gets the girl. The ending of Downhill Racer finds a memorable middle ground between the two by portraying a sports victory that doesn't feel triumphant or fulfilling. But the movie definitely does. If you want to see an American competitor top some Europeans to ease the sting of that Ryder Cup drubbing, or if it helps to watch a movie that makes you think winning isn't worth it anyway, you can become a late adopter of Downhill Racer like me. At the risk of closing on a note that reminds people of the "Poob has it for you" meme, Downhill Racer is on Pluto TV, where you can watch it for free. We'll link to it in the show notes, and if you like what you see, please tell me and/or my mom.
Ben, thank you. Very good. Have you seen One Battle After Another yet, by the way, while we're talking film?
I have not yet.
Lindsay?
Seeing it soon.
Anyone see it yet?
No, I need to this week.
Yeah, I'm hearing a lot of hype about this film.
Yes.
A lot of hype.
Not a sports movie, though, right?
Hype. No,
but a
not
great
a sports movie.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to going and seeing it. Anyhow, that is all for this episode. We also have a special bonus show that is in the podcast feeds right now for our Slate Plus members. It's about the WNBA reaching a boiling point in kind of a long simmering controversy over how it protects its players, how it's officiated, and more as the playoffs roll on. To hear that, you can subscribe to Slate Plus on Apple Podcasts by clicking Try Free at the top of our show page, or visit slate.com/hangupplus to get access wherever you listen. The episode is available right now, and we will see you there. Our show notes are at slate.com/hangup, and you can email us at hangup@slate.com. Don't forget to follow the show and rate and review us on Apple Podcasts. Our producer is Kevin Bendis, and for Ben Lindbergh and Lindsay Gibbs, I'm Alex Kirshner. Remember Zelma Beatty, and thanks for listening.